Morning, everybody, and welcome to Reality Chat. Let's hold on for a second and get our guest all logged in. Good morning, Janine. Bam. So I sent you the request, and we should be.
Haha. Oh, wait. And then there's my sound. Hi.
Good morning.
Is it morning for you?
No.
Oh, okay. I was like, shoot. I mean, I just had a talk with a girl in Korea, but that was like a while ago. So,
Hello. When I was a lifeguard in high school and in college, and
yeah,
whatchamacallit, I had one of the guys that worked at the community center. He would always say good morning to everybody, no matter what time of day it was.
that's sweet.
We had like a really long talk about it one day because I was like, "Wait, why do you do that?" And he was like, "Well, over the years," he was like an older guy. He was like, "I've noticed more than any other greeting, good morning. People tend to like welcome the best and have the best feelings about. So he just
Yeah.
said that no matter what time of day it is." And I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna try that."
Well,
So,
good morning to you then, Jordan.
morning, Jeannie. How are you today or tonight?
Uh, I'm not gonna lie, today was a little bit more interesting. We tried to do a couple simple things around the house as roommates to just kind of like figure out like how to like defunk a lot of the things. And one of the things we went back into was our gardening. So today I collected a bunch of pine needles because I did not want to edit my book today. I was like, nope, that's the only thing I will not do right now when I'm in the house. So yeah. So today is good. I got all cleaned for this. Took a shower, So just in case people on the other side, they will not smell my funk.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
What about you?
Um, Today was a bit of a challenging day. I still go to work, and
Yeah,
there's sometimes when people are put in a difficult situation, they act out, I guess. And I had a lot of people around me acting out today, so it
yeah.
was. I think that that can happen. That's a human thing, but it's uh, it's not the funnest when you're not the one that's acting out.
Yeah.
But
Well, at least in situations or circumstances, how do you best address it? Usually like during like stressful times or times where it kind of seems like things are out of control.
um, I think my default method for dealing with reality, whether or not it's a good or bad time, is trying to understand what's actually happening, and
Hmm.
then taking my understanding of what's going on and trying to compare that to what I want to happen and trying to see
Yeah.
how those two can meet. And so when things get stressful, I tend to try as hard as I can to figure out what's the cause of the stress, because often
Hmm.
I've learned in my experience the thing that causes people to act out is normally not what they're expressing,
Hmm.
and that can be very tricky. So trying to not get emotional myself, trying to stay present, and um, I don't like to solve other people's problems when they become emotional. I think I
Yeah.
can, but I think that teaches them that that's an acceptable way to act. Um, I like to, which is the way more difficult thing to do, I think, try and understand what's happening and then create an environment that really encourages the other person to understand what's happening and then try to
Yeah.
give them clues and try to have them figure it out. But that can be tough when you're not the person with the most authority in the room.
Yeah. I like the way you actually said it. Like it is tricky because one of the things that we were discussing on Tuesday, I was on this call with like health coaches. Didn't know that was like an actual area of expertise. So it was kind of different to be in like a conversation with a bunch of them. And I was just speaking on behalf of what it was like to have my writing kind of reflect some of the things that they teach, realizing that you can only echo what other people have already said. You can't actually teach anyone. So it's funny the way that you had said it because one the way they kind of like determined the term was when you're actually coaching someone, if you give them the answer, they don't actually get it. It's not until they say it. So at least for what you were experiencing, I like that you released a space for them, because a lot of times people do try to give advice. It's like you can't tell them. That's why hypocrisy is the funniest thing. We can't hear it from other people. We have to hear it and experience it from ourselves. So
Yeah, I think human psychology is such an interesting thing. And sometimes, like, especially when things are going on that I both understand and don't understand, like, I see why this has happened, but like, how is this happening? Um, it's always interesting to me to see, what was I talking about? The idea, like, I think I can tell you new information because I think that's like the whole idea of teaching, but
ooh,
you
okay.
have to show up thinking Jordan's going to teach me something today.
Yeah.
But if you don't show up like that, I can't teach you anything. And if you're not wanting to learn and already prepped for that, like if you showed up to class, you paid your tuition, you're like, I'm going to learn this. But if you're not in that mode, then I can't teach you. And that's when I have to go into this mode. And coaches, they're not teachers. So
Yes.
I don't think that people are there to learn from them. They're there to accomplish a task, but that can sometimes be mentally separated from learning.
Right. Sorry, I guess the way that my wording came out, because it goes back to your last talk. I forgot exactly what it was called, but good questions. Specifically about
Oh
the
yeah,
way
the
that
coaching
people act.
conversation.
Yeah, yeah. So same thing. So yeah, you show up, and if you have the intention to want to do it, it's different. But what you were sorry, from the conversation about what had happened at work, when people sometimes say things, and if people want to go up and give them advice, like exactly what you're saying. If they're like, nope, I don't want to hear it, I already know. I forgot how you had worded it though, but it was kind of like when someone knows that they're wrong, but instead of admitting it, and you had written that thing about the logical alias, like instead of wanting to
Yeah.
like cut it up and reword it. I apologize. I know I'm going off track right now, but it is interesting the way you're saying it based on how I had just explained it, because I'm like, oh shoot, I still do that sometimes where I'm like, oh, I want to learn, but all of a sudden, like, I don't want to learn from this person based on whatever I'm going through. I'm in a funk. So all of a sudden, you might hear exactly what you need to, but if you're not ready to receive it, like your intention isn't to actually gain awareness. It's almost like, nope, shade down. I don't want the answer. I want you to just agree with me. So yeah, thank you for saying that. That was interesting.
Wow. Like, I don't know. I feel this year, I mean, there's been a lot of stuff going on this year, but this year I think I've been um, spending my time talking to people that are more interested in hearing the truth and getting to what you're actually trying to say rather than just saying, yeah, 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 I get what you mean. And it's nice to kind of have that validation, for lack of a better term, that like this is a real thing, or like these are subtly different and the subtle difference makes a big difference. Um,
Hmm.
but uh, but yeah, that's a lot of things that Janine was stringing together. Just for the people that are watching, hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We are kind of bringing in some concepts that I had explained in one of the episodes of podcasts that I released earlier this year
Yeah. Yeah.
called the Perspective Podcast, and there's an episode on logic aliasing, which is kind of like an engineering look at why some people might misunderstand other people. But there's not any math in it, and I really made sure, like if you listen, I made pretty good sure that there's not any math in it. But kind of a way to look at misunderstandings that I think can help you navigate that and help you not get as frustrated. And then also, I think last week we had a workshop on good questions, and we had a really good discussion on what is the point of asking questions, and can you ask better questions um, to actually get what you want, and can you ask questions that lead you further away from what you want. So we kind of tied that in, and I don't want to leave you guys out of the loop too much in our live conversation, but that was kind of the intro. Janine, hello, I'm so glad you're here. You are someone who is always bringing light, that's why I call you sunshine, and good perspectives that I don't naturally come up with. So I'm glad to be here with you on today's episode of Reality Chat. and we are going to spend a little bit of time having a talk about something called responsibility, but
Hmm.
specifically in the box of responsibility towards the pursuit of happiness, like your responsibility for you being happy, for you pursuing your dreams, and how that is something. Is it your responsibility? What do you need to do in order to get that? And kind of that's my concept of what we talked about earlier today. But to kind of bring everybody else up to speed, hello, people. There are people joining. I will be reading the comments. I think Janine might be doing the same thing. And if you guys have something, a question to ask or comments, please say stuff and then we'll interact with you. So, but we're going to have a good conversation and I hope you guys enjoy. But I think, as if my memory serves correctly, this concept for this talk was kind of something that you were excited to have.
Yeah.
So can you
Uh,
explain a little bit like why you thought this was a good talk to have?
yeah. So when first it was like, okay, what are we going to talk about? Because one, I was really humbled when you first asked me. I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel like most of the times when you have these types of shows, Jordan, I'm like one of the people who will like kind of like answer like one or two like inserts. So I was kind of blown away that you actually thought I was someone who you'd want to have a full discussion with. So thank you. Yes, I will marry you, Yelda. Anyway, so when we were talking about different conversations and topics that you were asking if people would be interested about hearing you discuss. That's why I really thought about this because I love the way that you literally like kind of like dissect certain areas of everything and just knowing before everything was going on with 2020, it's something that I thought was a profound type of idea within just the way that this country was created. We always talk about life, liberty, and we know about the pursuit of happiness, but how often do we think about it being our responsibility? Because one of the things that I always get tag teamed on, specifically with like when I was in my line of work as an engineer, even in college, about like my choices within relationships, and always at holidays with family, it's always like, well, what are you doing? It's like, oh, well, it seems like you're happy. Oh, it seems like you're having a great time. Although it is really interesting that so often when the conversations get brought up, it's never how you're being. It's more about like what's in your life at that time that is making you happy. And so this last year, well, I guess just these last like 5 months of 2020, I think just in general, it's been such like an eye opener to realize how often I know I'm like, it's just June. How often we actually don't have those things around us, specifically these last like 2 months being in Minnesota, because I am no longer in my sunshiny state of California. And I'm realizing that that's something that these last 2 weeks, specifically this last week for me in Minnesota, how often we don't actually realize like where we can be responsible not only for our own pursuit of happiness, but how often we make our pursuit at pretty much like I don't want to say the sacrifice, but at the hindrance of other people having like bare minimums or anything like that. So that's why I really wanted to hash this out. Is like I want this conversation to be more intentional about what as humans within our own capacity of humanity to reach out to what it means for us to have our pursuit of happiness, not cause hindrance, harm, or the feeling of like, I don't want to say hate, but the feeling of non-love towards others because we'd rather have our own happiness be reached. So in a nutshell, I was feeling it a lot for myself because so often, specifically these last like 3 months, I've been promoting for my book that I just released, and I'm realizing right now that's not where things are going in regards to like where my voice should be the strongest. So then when you ask this question, I'm like, dang, Jordan, that's a really good question. What do I want my topic to be? And I'm like, I really want to focus on what happiness is as like not just a construct, but as a collective, like what we could actually do to have that still be something that we can openly pursue without it hindering someone else's voice. So that is why I brought it up.
Okay. This I just want to point out because I don't think I explained the point of reality chat to all the people that are watching. But
Oh, okay.
this is exactly the point of reality chat, and I'm hoping it happens organically every time. I don't want to poke and prod and like set it up and script it too much. But the point is to have real conversation that the people inside the conversation are actually interested in. It's not some random topic to get views. It's a actual conversation that we are going to learn from, and then hopefully the people watching can learn from. I got some questions about your book though that you might want to, shameless plug, answer those questions. But uh,
I'll post about the book later, I promise. Actually, a lot of the things that is kind of like touchy though, because like there's a character's name in there specifically that I didn't know was going to be like such a hot topic now. But it is a defined word to base off a group of people, actually Persian group. So Yalda, love you. And it is something that is, in my mind, something that at the time I didn't realize as I was growing up as a 12-year-old girl. I felt a lot of connection towards being called out for being a certain color and having certain demeanors and just being raised with rosy tinted glasses about, oh, you're unhappy? Well, that's okay. I can figure it out. Let's talk about it. Let's have a good time. And realizing that the way that I was raised was very sheltered. For people who don't know, I was born in La Jolla, California, with my plastic surgeon dad and our nice Porsche car, and my mom stayed at home and she did all the PTA stuff for me and my four older siblings. So at least for me, it's interesting because it wasn't until said divorce and me moving to a place called Joshua Tree, also in California, did I find out that racism was still around. So a lot of this book specifically is talking about what it was like for Janine up until 12 years old to go through a life where family was perfect and everything looked happy. And like the main character, I think a lot of those constructs kind of exploded, which is why I'm still on this pursuit of happiness. Because it wasn't until after I left my engineering cushy job in Los Angeles. It was Los Angeles, but it was the Crenshaw LAX line. Don't get it twisted. I was living in Hawthorne. I worked right out of the Inglewood area. But I moved to New York 2.5 years later. I fell in love with a few of you who actually know him. His name is Daniel Yanis Ford. And I realized that I had still lived in this little life where I thought it was perfect, but it was really just a shell that looked nice and painted. And not gonna lie, I felt really good about life, but I was realizing again I was more focused on a ball of what it looked like on the outside, but it was actually really hollow. And I love that there are so many people right now that are on this from Minnesota because I'm seeing you guys come up. This was not who I didn't have a septum. I wasn't talking about like spirituality. I really did live in that life where I thought that the title and everything was really important until I realized that I wanted more meaningful conversations. Like, Jordan, the reason I even know you is because of that wonderful woman named Justine Booty Santoso, who literally was someone who got me before anyone else got me. And she actually went through like a kind of weird phase that a lot of people did when I quit my job. And the last few months in New York City, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. So at least for the book right now, what this conversation is going to be focused on is literally like cliff notes of it. So I will definitely put information about the book later, but at least for everyone on the like, I guess this is a call or a chat, we can talk about that later because what I really want to get out of this conversation, I hope everyone does in the echo as well, is realizing how important these Sonder lives are in our lives. Because the book itself really highlights what it means to be someone who you might not know me, you might never actually meet me, but I might just be like someone you saw on a bus or someone you saw in a class or someone you saw in a movie theater, and realizing there's that profound like relationship with them to realize that they are just as unique, they have just as many problems, they have just as many people who love them, and they live this unique life regardless of you being aware of it. So for all the Sonder lives out there on this call right now, I bring to you a live clip of what the book would look like with Jordan as my host, because I'm not gonna lie, I am a total tangent train sometimes. Um, but yeah, I will give you guys information about that later. But I definitely want to have this conversation.
Okay. Well, I think somebody did post a link to your book, so shouts out to
Oh,
the crowd. Uh,
fine.
um,
Thank you.
yeah, Janine, I know you were working on a book, and then you said you were editing a book. Are you writing a new book right now?
Yeah, so with this book again, and it's interesting though, because it's 4 parts. So I've got my first part that's already out, and that is pretty much Janine before she went to college. This next level that I'm like editing right now is pretty much what it was like after I left Joshua Tree. The third part is pretty much what it was like for me living in New York City and going about what it was supposed to be as an engineer. And then the fourth one is just like self-identity, and then you actually get to meet my alias of Daniel. So yeah, it is more of a challenge than I thought, but like the construct is all there. It's actually going through it and crossing fingers, finding a good editor for it.
Okay. Justine, we're not going on a tangent. I am watching
No.
the content, and we're right on topic. So thank you for that. But uh,
Thanks,
I
dude.
I
Son,
was
I will figure out how to do it without that too. Huh?
I was watching this podcast between Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson, actually, who
Ooh,
are
okay.
two people. I've been gaining a lot more respect for Joe Rogan because for a while in my mind I was just like, what does Joe Rogan do? Like, but I think he's kind of on this path that I think a lot of the people that I admire now are, where you were in the world, you thought there was a way of it, and then you started looking outside of the box and you're like, oh, this is different, and you just started exploring different things. And now he has this podcast where he talks about creative ideas, he meets different people, but he's still into like lifting and wrestling and all that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
one of the things that they were talking about, that Jordan Peterson came up with, was this thing called the self-authoring program. And it was a way to help people, I guess, figure out their lives, accept the tragedy of being born, like being forced to live in this world, in this system, and like be accountable for that, understand it, stop feeling sorry for yourself, stop asking for handouts, and go do something with yourself. And it's kind of this process of forcing you to self-evaluate. And I think that's interesting that you chose to write, at least based on a true story, books, because I haven't read the full series yet. I don't even think it's written yet, but that I think is an incredibly important part of pursuing happiness. I made a post this morning. I thought, oh man, I almost felt ashamed of myself for like pretending to be woke to like make that kind of post. But it's talking about how important it is to know yourself, to understand yourself, and acknowledge that you have flaws, acknowledge that you have shortcomings, and work on those. And then also work on just really knowing who you are, rather than, am I doing this because when I was 5, my mom said it was good and I believed her? Or am I doing this because I thought about it and this is good? And I
Yeah.
think part of that is going into your past and knowing what you did and understanding that. And I think writing like a biography is an excellent way to force yourself to confront everything, because you
Hmm.
can't just be like, oh, from 12 to 14, that was traumatic, so skip that and then move on. Like if you're
Yeah.
writing about, you got to go through all of it. So kudos to you. That's tough for anybody.
Thank you.
I like
Well, th-
applaud you for doing that.
thank you so much, Jordan. Because, like, honestly, the hardest part about this is why I'm editing it. A lot of the scenes that I do, like, I take scenes from when I was in Zion. I take scenes when I was, like, in my first statics class. And granted, I switched around to, like, yeah, oh my gosh. And it's only fun because as I'm having these, like, edit sessions, I'm reliving areas where I did feel kind of stuck. So I'm glad that, at least for, like, the biography side, like, the fun thing about it is almost therapy, like in the weirdest way, because I can actually now like relate to certain people a lot more outside of the context of it being like statics, or outside of the context of us having a disagreement when we were on a mountain. So the thing that I enjoy about this is as I'm editing it, I'm actually reaching out to the people specifically, like right now, almost all of them are with like my sister or my brother. So it is so much fun. Because it is kind of like a release in the sense that I'm self-developing on the areas where I have to check myself. Like what areas did I not fully like answer like my brother's questions and stuff. And I didn't realize this because it's like 5 years of like just like writing stuff, and then you realize like how much of it can't be finished because you haven't actually had those conversations in your own life. So, yeah.
Wow. This is so interesting how, like, so I alluded earlier that I have this podcast, and I like the whole point of the podcast is for me to like share concepts, and it's not like these concepts are the truth or they're lying to you. It's just things I think, and in my mind, the more concepts you have, the more you're aware of, the more you're able to think and connect things, so you're more free to move within the world because you can understand through all these different ways. And so I'm trying to like just
Mm-hmm.
front load concepts, especially like when I get to talking to people like this. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
I'll think of something and I want to tell you, but it takes 30 minutes to say. um, and so I'm caching podcasts of those kind of concepts in case it's that important. You can go listen to the podcast.
Yeah.
But a lot of the stuff that you're talking about now, I think even the one that I'm coming out with this Friday, I think is very related to the pursuit of happiness. It's I think understanding and talking about certain concepts with other people to get their different perspectives on it, so that you
Mm-hmm.
don't really live in this echo chamber of yourself. I think often, especially uh, with my experience, everybody wants to be happy, whatever that means. And I don't think people take the time to understand who they are, what happiness is, or what will bring them happiness. They just skip to, I want to be happy. And they do things because there's pressures from the world. You have deadlines. There's people wanting things from you. You think that certain things are important when they may not be as important. So there's all this stuff going on in real time. But you
Mm-hmm.
also have to like step back and outside of all of the stress of life to really plan and have a good life. And sometimes that can be very hard, or you can have all these reasons why you don't do that. Or sometimes all the media and all the people talking to you and stuff make it seem like that's not the good thing to do. Um,
Yeah.
but I really think that when you are talking about the pursuit of happiness, to kind of get more on the concept so Justine doesn't yell at us too much.
I
Um,
know. I'm actually reading Sebastian's comment, which I'm like, this is on point with what Jordan's saying or asking. Yeah.
Happiness is a lot of things, but I really think happiness comes from acting in who you are,
Mm-hmm.
and really having the confidence to say, this is me, I'm going to do this. This is not me, I'm not going to do that. And it doesn't matter how much you yell, I'm not going to do that. Um,
Yeah.
sorry, I just read that. So I used the word yell like serendipitously. But in terms of the pursuit of happiness, uh, what do you think, in like in kind of like a vague concept? I think it's kind of hard to put down into words. The idea of happiness is like, what is that when somebody's saying like, because you were saying you're like people back in your life like at Christmas and stuff would be like, oh well, as long as you're happy and all that. Like I always thought that that was kind of just filler good vibe stuff that people would say to like
Mm-hmm.
fill the space of awkwardness but not actually say anything. um, but when we're talking about actual happiness, like I'm interested in finding it, and if I have to make a plan, if I have to struggle, if I have to spend time or invest, it's okay. I want actual happiness. What is that?
Okay, so I know with Yalda, what she's asking to is like defining it, like, and it's not an easy thing for me to say in one word, but the way that I would define it or say happiness is in that moment when you're able to see someone else living their life and you have nothing else but like almost, I want to say almost empathy, but when you're able to see someone else or see another thing, whatever it is, and just be completely content. Because like I think it really comes from like the ability to like just be present, without any type of expectations or anything going forward. So happiness, at least in my concept of it, would to almost be able to reflect what with what you are or who you are being in that moment without needing anything extra. It's almost like, see, for me to define happiness, I'd almost have to first define like what it would be to like be sad or be angry. Like I almost feel like anytime you're not anything other, like for me, that's almost like a content thing. And I don't want it to sound like a cop out, although that's the one thing that I'm still working on, which is why I wanted to have this conversation because I'm realizing that in the pursuit of me trying to have happiness, and it was interesting because I was reading that book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F, and I haven't finished it, but like at least from what they were explaining it about, like don't try and like don't move on or like don't have too much behind it because like literally the moment that you try to have happiness or you try to have success or you like the more you focus on it, it's almost like the opposite. And from what someone else was explaining to me, it's almost like that ego or however people want to say it. It's like as soon as you want something too much or you focus on it extremely, it's almost like you're working against yourself. Like as soon as you want it, it's almost like you get the opposite. So when I think about defining happiness, it's the actual act of being able to find a subtle contentment. And I guess contentment doesn't always sound, oh, that's what I want. But it's allowing yourself to just be with what you have without wanting anything extra. And then going to what Sebastian was, and then we can come back because I'd like to hear, because that could totally be BS. But like as far as what I'm experiencing right now, like that is when I'm finding myself to be the happiest, is when I'm not wanting or thinking I didn't do enough or thinking I should have done something. Actually, I had a conversation with Boots the other day about it because at least in my mind, I was feeling so sad about feeling like I wasn't doing enough. And then I realized like all I needed to do was like answer people back or like reach out to Daniel or text my mom. And it's like in those moments of just being present to like what you're doing and being satisfied, like that's when I'm finding the greatest happiness. It's not going to that extra trip to Disneyland or finding out I just won a lottery ticket, which again, I know that would add happiness, but then I feel like then there'd be like all those other expectations, and expectations for me sometimes just isn't what I want. But what Sebastian was asking was like, how do you balance between living the dream and that whole practicality? I think that's what he said, practicality. And that's also really sometimes of a struggle to me because I feel like when you're trying to live the dream and then you realize there's like, oh, back to life. It's almost like when you're about to go on vacation, you're having like all these thoughts about it, but you forget everything that's happening at that moment. And then when you're coming back and all of a sudden you're like, oh, shoot, there's all those things I forgot. So at least for me, the way I kind of find that happiness at any level of like knowing that I'm still pursuing what makes me find joy in my life or has me feeling like other people around me are becoming successful. That's another thing. When you surround yourself by people who are like-minded, and so you're not always trying to fill other people's cups and then you feel like your cup is getting drained, but it's a whole other topic. So a lot of times when I'm trying to find like how I'm living the dream versus finding practicality, that is one of the reasons I feel like I did drop out of the whole engineering world as of right now. Like I know I can always go back into it and recalibrate myself to see if I can actually find the happiness that I'm finding right now as like a fitness instructor and as a author. Although knowing that the only thing that kept me happier in that position was a paycheck. And I'm like, if I ever get to a point where I need to find out how much I actually have to be sustainable to have a job justify like how many hours I'm spending, I'm glad I finally did it when I was in New York City. But to be living a dream that you actually want, and everyone, your pursuit of happiness is completely different. But to find practicality, it comes back to finding what you're pursuing in happiness. Because if you can find that the job that you're following or the person you're in love with or the dream car that you want, if that's really where you want to pursue your happiness, I would highly suggest that you start practicing things every day that also give you that happiness. Because if your one dream is to like follow a tangible like thing to be like the lasting thing of like why it's worth for you to be following it as like you're living the dream, I guess I'd go back to that quote. It's not always about the destination. It really is the journey. So finding a practice that you could actually stay with like every day, like, um, but yeah, sorry, I went on a little tangent there. But to go back to what y'all did ask, like my definition of happiness is to find where you can remain present without having expectations or having a set idea of like what it needs to look like. And then to go back to what Sebastian is asking about living the dream versus practicality of it, it's realizing like where do you define like your limits or where your actual goal is. So you're not always just chasing this idea of living the dream. Like how often do you actually let yourself live it? Whew. Okay. Sorry, those were the only two questions I saw on there so far.
That's all good. And shout out to all the people like participating. I think
Yeah.
one of the things that I really want to have with this, hey Therese, is to have a conversation with the person that's on the screen, but then also have the people engage and be a part of it. I feel like if you watch a YouTube video and you just sit there like, you can leave the YouTube video feeling like you learned something, but if you took a test, I would say more often than not you would fail it. I think participation has a lot to do with you actually learning and getting something out of it. So so yeah, I'm listening to you. You're saying a lot of things, so I got my notebook taking notes. Because you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna respond to that. I'm gonna respond to that, but I'm gonna forget if I don't take notes. But
Okay. Well, how would you define happiness?
I think an interesting kind of parallel idea that's been brought up in this conversation, which I think is very related to happiness, is contentment. And
Yeah.
the metaphor that I use in my life, I'm always concerned with the utility of things. I'm very utilitarian in that
Mm-hmm.
even with a concept, why would I, in my mind, define a concept in a way that's not useful to me? And so this is what I've come out with the idea of happiness. And I picture happiness like everybody has a cup. So I have a cup.
Yeah.
And this is let's say it's a 24-ounce cup.
Mm-hmm.
And I can hold 24 ounces of liquid in here. And if this cup is half full, then I have this much contentment.
Huh.
And I am half content with my life. And I'm 75% content with my life. And then like this, if it's full, then I'm totally content with my life.
Yeah.
And so the amount of liquid in the cup is how content I am. But the action of water or liquid being poured into the cup, that's what happiness is. And when it's being poured in, I'm like, yeah, this is great. And but when it's in there and it's just sitting and it's not being poured, it's just still, that's my contentment. And then to add to this, there's this case where I'm pouring too much liquid in and it starts overflowing. And that's those amazing blissful moments that we achieve when just things are the best. Now, this idea, when I have this cup, everybody has their own cup. And one of the things about your cup is you start with a basic small cup. Like everybody gets started with like the free water cup at McDonald's. And if you choose to grow in your perspective, in your knowledge and your experience and stuff, it's like you trade up to a bigger and bigger container. And
Mm-hmm.
over time, your container can become as big as an ocean. But
Whoa.
you have to balance this because the bigger your container, the harder it is to be content.
Mm-hmm.
But the more overall content you can have. You can have more water, you can have more content if you're counting by numbers, but if you're looking at it as a percentage, it may not feel like that all the time, which I think is
Oh.
the concept of why intelligent people are never happy, that kind of saying.
Mm-hmm.
Because intelligent people, like I may have 4,000 gallons of water, but my tank may be 10,000 gallons, so I'm at 40%. And you may have a 24-ounce cup, but you're at 20 ounces. So you feel this bigger contentment, but like you're at a much bigger risk of like tipping your cup and having water flow out. And now you're much sadder and you only lost like this much water. Me,
Mm-hmm.
even though I don't feel as like I'm so happy all the time, like I can lose a serious amount of water and still be fine.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how I look at happiness more as like it's like a verb of being.
Mm-hmm.
It's a way of being in the moment that is not sustainable. It's something you have to be doing, like riding a wave. Like I'm riding a wave, and it's sometimes it's kind of hard to say that you're doing that, but because you're kind of like standing there and experiencing it. But
Yeah.
it's not something that's a constant state that you can always do. It's something that you can set up for certain periods of time, and then it has to stop. Um, and I think there's different types of happiness, what makes it even more confusing. I think people like different, they subscribe to different brands of happiness. Like people have their own favorite fruits, different people have their own favorite happiness. Um,
Yeah.
for me, there's a the Greek term called eudaimonia, which is the happiness of excellence. And that's kind of like if anybody plays sports, or you do something that requires skill in the moment, like fencing requires skill in the moment, and somebody like tries to lance at you, and you're like, oh, I see your lance, and you like parry it perfectly. Or you're ice skater, and you do some like crazy triple spin, and you know it's right, like you practice enough, you can feel the twist, and nobody has to tell you it's right, and then you land it exactly how you thought you would, and it hits, and you're like, yes, that was perfect. That feeling is the happiness of being excellent. And it takes work and practice and dedication and failure and growth. And that happiness is it only lasts for a very small period of time, I think. But to me, that type of happiness is important. I think to other people, there's the happiness that comes with like being included in a group. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and there's different types that you can go after, but I think having happiness and contentment is important, to where I think
Mm-hmm.
you should always strive to fill your cup, but you should always acknowledge the water that's in your cup. And in terms of focusing on happiness too much, I think, yeah, you can get a little bit of tunnel vision, and try so hard to get to happiness that you miss the point. um,
Mm-hmm.
I call that concept the non-list, where you're focused so hard on checking things off or doing things that you don't enjoy the life that is bringing you towards the accomplishment. And also because you're so focused on trying to accomplish a specific goal, I think there's a lot of cases in life where your ability to accomplish the goal is very harshly attached to your ability to be flexible and change over time. And if you're so focused on doing something that you're like, this is what I got to do, I'm going to do this, I'm going to blot everything else out, you may miss that what you thought was the plan that you made before you started. Like, how many times have you made the perfect plan before you knew anything about what you were going to do? Um, you may be like so focused on doing that you miss that, oh, I miscalculated this, maybe I should do this instead. Or, oh, like if my plan is to get married and have kids, and I'm so focused on that, and I have this like checklist for my ideal mate, and I'm like profiling people,
Mm-hmm.
and they need to have this job and whatever, I might miss that, like this person that's been next to me the whole time, that would have been a wonderful mate, and they liked me and like all that kind of stuff, because I'm so like this. um and so that was kind of a concept that I developed. I did a podcast on that. But and then lastly, the idea of being around people that inspire you. I remember back when I went to church when I was a little kid, there was this series that the pastor did called Iron Sharpens Iron. And um I think this is very like, if you're a mouse, or yeah, if you're a mouse and you hang out with scorpions, like, I don't think that you should be surprised if you get stung all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you can't see that. And I'm not saying scorpions are bad. Just like certain people have certain nature. And if you're around people who have a nature that's not conducive to yours, like even with gardening, you're not supposed to plant certain plants next to each other. Certain plants help each other, and certain plants hinder each other. And that's the same thing with people, with all living things. It's about juxtaposition. How are you going to place your things? How are you going to organize your things that's helpful? And if you're constantly organizing yourself around, I think the popular term is toxic people these days.
Mm-hmm.
um, It's gonna be difficult. You're just choosing to play a game on super ultimate hard mode when you don't have to. And if you want to do that because it gives you like pride that you can overcome that, I mean, that's up to you. But if you, the point is to just beat the game, and you can choose easy mode or you can choose ultra hard mode, then like what are you doing?
Well, at least with that though, and this kind of comes to like the concept that easy mode versus like hard mode, like for college and when people are choosing like if they are going to, I don't know, like at least in my mind, like I guess I'll go back to the first concept. When you have the concept of like easy or hard mode, like at least for me, like sometimes it is more rewarding when say I go to the gym or say I choose to do civil engineering. Sometimes for me, like it is something that I feel like giving myself that extra challenge, knowing that I'm also going to be working two jobs where one's going to be like 40 hours and then I'm going to take on like a summer job that's going to be like another 20 hours. Like I feel that a lot of times that used to be something that I would pursue because I wanted to see how far I could actually go for it.
For sure.
Um, yeah, so it's interesting because like now that you're bringing it up, like I mean, where I'm at right now, like I kind of wish I would have taken more acting classes, or I wish I would have been more involved with people who were out and doing like more political things, or possibly in a lot of cases, I wish I would have taken more journalist types of classes or tried to find those clubs because now where I'm at. But it is interesting because at least when you're talking about like filling your cup, like I feel like one thing that I did, and I'm going to take because I loved that concept that you had about like your 24 ounce and you only have 20 ounces now versus someone who has like so many gallon like tanks. I realized that like every time you try something new within the idea of like pursuing your happiness or coming where your contentment is, the first time you try to like ice skate, you might not do it at all, but that it like attempt to do it. Like for me, like that is like a huge thing of happiness. And I don't know if that does have my tank expand because all of a sudden someone might see them or they might see an attempt and it might inspire them to do it. And so who knows at what part when you're trying this super duper hard level that it might not be for you to pass the game that time, but it might be for someone else who's there. Because the other thing that I like about this idea or this concept of pursuing happiness is realizing that every echo that anyone puts out in the universe, sorry, I'm going to use that term, puts out in the universe, you never know what the intent that what the reason behind it is. It's kind of like that idea that every breath you take is essential. Every flap of the butterfly's wing is going to have that tsunami or that tank overflow. And so I think it's interesting the way that it is said, because I think so often my pursuit isn't always because I'm going to be 100% good at it, but it's the idea that it's there to be tried. Because I do realize that maybe a lot of times my tank isn't always full, but who's to say that my gallon tank that I only have like halfway filled, for me, I'm like, yeah, like it's only been like barely, like the bottom has been skimmed. So maybe it being half full, I'm like, right on, like it hasn't been half full for a long time. And at least for the water that sits there, I know, sorry, at least for the water that just kind of sits there, what I'm realizing, at least when I'm like pursuing what happiness is in those moments when you're really looking at like what it means to be still. And this is one thing I started learning, and I guess this is a off the topic of like what the analogy is for the water, but what I'm realizing right now, like the more I'm studying like meditation and getting into like the practice of Reiki, it's realizing how often we don't actually allow ourselves to just be still. So yeah, I realized when you were actually discussing like what it was like to be on easy mode or hard mode, I'm like, sorry, fudge. I do a lot. A lot of times I feel like I am someone who's always wanted to be on super hard level. But I'm not gonna lie, Jordan, one of the things that I think a lot of people, and I know we went to school together, but like honestly, like you were just one of those like phantoms like I knew existed and I knew you, but again, we like never really crossed paths. But like one of the things I was notorious for was one, never sleeping. I don't know how I actually made it through school sometimes. I'm like, man, I must have been an insomniac. But I think I was just so headstrong on like finding my happiness. that you're right. Like there was no point on me going on super hard level, but I'm so glad I did because if I hadn't, I don't know if I would be here right now. I don't know if I would have had this conversation right now because I would have been stuck in my head of like, I have no idea what it's going to look like. So for people who are in this call, I know, oh my gosh, Jax, I know. We used to take coffee shots in my apartment. I was so bad. I would be so tired, Jordan. I'd be like, Jackie, I have a study to midterm tomorrow and I can't sleep. Let's make coffee and take shots. And she would make me hot coffee. I'd put it in shot glasses. I'd try to take a shot and it was boiling hot. I don't know what I was thinking. But anyway, total side note. So at least when I'm thinking about all of the different ideas of like what happiness looks like, I'm realizing that I used to also be someone who wouldn't do something unless I knew exactly what this looked like. So again, for everyone who's on the call right now, I actually wanted to talk to Jordan just a little bit before. He's like, nope, we're gonna do it live. I'm like, okay, no pressure. We saw. But yeah, this is one of those things about happiness is realizing that and I want to dive into this because this is what I'm talking about. It's like the pursuit. I'm thinking, especially on this call, is also realizing, are you willing to do things that make you feel so uncomfortable, but you're going to go past it just because you know it might get you a step closer to what you don't know. So go for that, Jordan, because I love taking it on hard mode because apparently I'm a soft little ray of sunshine that just doesn't get beat down.
Well, yeah, it's these conversations I feel like could go on for a very long time, but we get kicked off
Yeah.
after like an hour, so we like have a couple of minutes left. But
Oh no.
okay. There, I feel like if you construct a really good metaphor, it becomes, or a analogy or whatever, it becomes good because you can take it to so many different places. And like you're talking about the importance of stillness, and I would say like if you ever had like a bottle of water and it's been in your car for a while, and then you're like, oh man, I'm thirsty, and you go to that bottle and it's like the water in there is like not good to drink anymore because it's been in your
Mm-hmm.
car for like 2 months. Like it's important to clean the water in your tank, period. It doesn't
Okay.
matter how big your tank is, get your water clean. um, and in terms of being still and doing self-care and stuff, that's like ultra important to happiness. Because if you have 400,000 gallons of rancid water, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
why? Uh, why would you do that? So I'm glad that you brought that up in terms of like taking different looks at happiness. And in terms of the pursuit, I think it's very important to push your limits and make yourself uncomfortable. One of the sayings that I've heard this year that I've really like thought about a lot is the person who is willing to give up the most and to sacrifice the most and make themselves the most uncomfortable will achieve the most.
Okay.
And within that, because a lot of stuff sounds good, but I think you got to fall back on what I started with it, like know yourself and work on yourself. Because if your goal has nothing to do with being the best or exploring everything, then putting stuff on hard mode is just going to be awful for you.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and I would say, like, what do you want? Like me, I want to like explore all the things and meet the people and have conversations and learn stuff and travel and get bit by a snake and then discover a new antidote. Like that's what I want to do. But that's not what everybody wants to do. Nope. A lot of people don't
Yeah.
want to get bit by a snake. Um, and if you're gonna live your life on hard mode, but really all you want to do is get married and drink hot chocolate in front of a fire, then
Mhm.
I mean, like you could do that with a very
Yeah.
simple, like a much smaller cup. And so I'd say happiness is different for everybody, and the freedom
Mm-hmm.
to pursue happiness for everybody, I think it goes along with this idea of the golden rule, which I think you alluded to earlier, which is do unto others as you would have done unto you. Where
Mm-hmm.
I feel I can come up with my own goals and do whatever I want in order to pursue happiness, as long as it allows everyone else to do the same thing. I shouldn't
Yes.
be having happiness at the expense of other people. I shouldn't step on people for my happiness. And if I do accidentally, which will probably happen a lot, um, because I'm imperfect, I don't have omnipotent vision and all that kind of stuff, I should acknowledge it and apologize, and then also try to like build my karma by like helping other people to kind of like do that, because if everybody helps everybody, I think it's okay. But then try not to do it in a way where you're giving people stuff that they're not taking and using, like when you're teaching people that aren't trying to be taught.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's what we were actually talking at the very beginning is like how often do people actually have that intent on wanting to learn versus not wanting to learn at all, and then just shutting out the information because it's kind of like when your parents will tell you something and they'll tell you this again and they'll tell you again, but it's not until your friend or your idol says it, you're like, wow, that's so insightful, and then your parents like, I've been telling you that your entire life. With that though, and it kind of does come with what you had just said specifically about what your happiness looks like. Because I know we were discussing at the very beginning in regards to what it looks like to have your happiness and then realize, and this is how the whole content thing started, like if you're able to see someone else doing well, and again, not having envy or jealousy, because realizing that if you're pursuing your happiness, are you doing it in a way that someone else has to have theirs hindered or that they become harmed because you want something to have you be happiness? And at least with the pursuit of happiness, and I actually wanted to form it as a question, what do you think the alignment with it within us is to have you pursue your own happiness? And then also, what would it look like to have that for all of humanity or all of the world? Because I have an idea about what it looks like, but I want to hear your thoughts first in regards to what the pursuit of happiness has if everyone is able to seek it and actually start practicing it. If everyone started practicing it, not just for an assignment, but they actually had the intent on pursuing their own happiness, knowing it's different for everyone.
Okay, well, we have 4 minutes. We can do this.
Oh, we got this. We got this.
There's an idea by Immanuel Kant. He's a philosopher that's called a categorical imperative, and there's a couple of ways to look at it. But categorical imperatives are kind of like this. In a nutshell, it's possible to look at that idea as a measuring stick to say what's good to do and what's not good to do. And there's this test for categorical imperative that goes like, well, okay, is this good to do or is this not good to do? Let me ask the question of, if everybody did this all the time, would things be okay? Mm-hmm. And so, like mowing your lawn, if everybody did that all the time, things be okay. That's fine. Stabbing your neighbor, what if everybody did that all? No, that's bad. So don't do that.
No.
And like, what if everybody pursued happiness and respected other people's ability to pursue happiness? I think if they did it genuinely in a way mm-hmm. where they consistently over the journey kept the golden rule intact, where they were being respectful of others' pursuits, and that would involve, if everybody was doing it, I think that would involve a lot of recalibrating and rechecking, because as people get up and up and up in their goals, they're going to start competing for things, and the motives might change. And so if you're constantly reestablishing, like, don't be attacking other people when you're pursuing your goals, I think it'd be really fun and it'd be really inspiring. I think one of the most disheartening things in my life is to watch other people just sad sack it and be okay with that, and just be mm-hmm. like unhappy and exist in perpetual unhappiness and complain and all that kind of stuff. That takes energy away from me. Yeah. And if everybody was trying to do stuff and figure it out and not complain and like, oh, but I can do this, that feel okay, but I can do that, then it's like, oh, then I could do that. Oh, what did you try? And then I think when you get into a society or a friends group or a relationship that is like that, it's so amazing because it's a small example of what could be if everyone was like that. And I think we have a minute and a half left. So if you want, Miss Janine, I would say, can you give us the title of your book? And, yeah, I know. I want to keep talking about this, but I also do.
We'll take it offline, because the thing that I feel like it would create is that idea of humanity and peace. Because if you're all pursuing your own happiness, it means you do recognize in other people that they are you in some fraction of what they're pursuing. And we'd actually start echoing it back to the people who have the messages that are answering the questions we have. And we'd be able to do it without hating, hindering, or harming any other individuals. But my title of my book, and I'm glad you asked, because again, if you read it, it comes off both ways because English language is so interesting. So it actually does read Sonder Lives and Sonder Lives. So depending on which part of the book you are in, it's actually true on both occasions.
Okay. So
Yeah.
I know I always get to this point where we're rushing at the end because an hour is not enough for these topics that we have. But thank you, Janine, for having this reality chat with me on uh, the personal responsibility in the pursuit of happiness. I think if you want to find out what her book is, you can go to my page or her page. I'll put a link in the pictures of her for the advertisements for this, so you can go find that book. Also, yeah, thank you guys for joining. And this has been Reality Chat, and I will see you later. We got to get kicked off.